Chapter 1. A letter on a windowsill. Rose Hill was not a village that courted trouble. Nestled snugly between the winding green of meadowland and the gentle blue sweep of the downs. It boasted no factories, no traffic lights, and a single constable who preferred fishing to enforcing the law. Life here unfolded with predictable rhythm. Milk arrived before 7. The bakery's loaves vanished by noon. And the church bell tolled each hour with a weary solemnity, as if time itself had settled into a leisurely pace. Jane Marple, long retired and quietly revered, cherished this simplicity. She had spent her years unraveling the chaos beneath human courtesies, seeing through the masks people wore and the secrets buried in their tidy gardens. Rose Hill suited hurt, wore its peace like a well-kept promise, though occasionally a shift in the wind brought whispers of something darker, like mist creeping in from the moors. Today I carried such a whisper. It began with a letter, or rather, the strange manner of its arrival. Millicent Toller, who lived 3 doors down, had been Miss Marple's neighbor for 17 years, a widow with a passion for tulip bulbs and orderly fences. She was not one to fluster easily. So when she appeared at Miss Marple's gate before breakfast, still in slippers, her gray hair half pinned beneath a scarf, it was clear something had rattled her. "Jane," she called, knocking with an urgency reserved for emergencies like fires or lost cats. "Are you up?" Miss Marple, already settled in her armchair by the front window with a well-worn copy of Mansfield Park, set down her tea and rose. "Come in, Millicent. I was just thinking of making another pot." Mrs. Toller stepped inside, clutching an envelope as if it might bite. It was plain, off-white, and unsealed, but she held it with a wariness that belied its ordinary appearance. "I found this on my windowsill," she said, standing rigid, refusing to sit. Not in the post, not slipped under the door, just lying there, as if someone placed it with care. Miss Marple took the letter gently. The paper was heavy, the sort that spoke of old-fashioned etiquette, but what struck her was the handwriting. It was unnervingly perfect, stiff, uniform letters. Not the natural flow of a practiced hand, but the mechanical precision of someone mimicking a script without feeling its meaning. She unfolded the note. "You remember what happened? You were there?" He never forgot. "And now, neither will you." No signature, no date, just those eerie, measured words. And the faintest scent of something floral, lavender, or possibly lilac. Miss Marple did not speak right away. Her blue eyes moved over the message. One simmer, then slowly lifted to meet Millicent's face. "Who is he, do ya suppose?" "I haven't the faintest idea," Millicent said, flustered, "and I certainly didn't remember what happened." "That's the worst of it. It feels like an accusation, but I don't know what it's accusing me of." Miss Marple nodded gently, not remembering. Something doesn't always mean it didn't happen. Sometimes it simply means it's buried. Millicent gave a slight shudder and turned toward the window where the morning light had begun to stretch across. "The rose trellis outside. I haven't seen handwriting like that." Miss Marple added, "It's oddly rehearsed, though someone learned it from a copybook, but never actually practiced writing in real life." "You mean like awkward?" Millicent asked. "Not necessarily. It could just as well be an adult, perhaps. One who didn't go to school, or someone deliberately hiding their real hand." Miss Marple folded the letter and offered it back, but Millicent shook her head. No, you keep it. I don't want it in the house. I haven't been able to eat since I found it." "Was anything else disturbed? Any sign someone had been near the window?" "No footprints, nothing taken, just the letter." Miss Marple nodded again. "Then it was meant for you alone? Not a burglary, not a prank, something personnel." Kettle began to whistle in the background, but neither woman, moved by mid-morning. Rose Hill was humming with whispers. Evelyn marched the young church organist that also received A letter delivered the same way on her windowsill, the village post mistress. Dora Reeves heard it from her cousin, who heard it from the paper boy who'd spotted Constable Drew arriving at Evelyn's cottage in Levine, a face pale as a clean napkin. The letters were not the same, but they had the same scent of menace. Evelyn had read, "He saw you, I saw you." He never forgot. There were only 4 of them by noon, 4 recipients: Millicent Toller, Evelyn March, Mr. Elma Sproul, the retired school teacher, and the villagers reader, Dr. Arthur Mellink. Each message was different, but always cryptic, and always signed with a simple M.I. Wonder. Miss Marple murmured to herself that afternoon, standing by her kitchen sink and watching blackbird settle on the Thiggerton wall. We are all so certain of our pasts, only because no one has yet called them into question. She said it aloud, not for any listener, but because old women woe have seen too much, often think aloud, not out of forgetfulness but out of the habit of reaching conclusions through careful thought and reflections. She poured herself another cup of tea and sat quietly. There was a knock at her door. It was Constable Drew, a young man with dissent manners and an unfortunate tendency to dismiss anything that didn't come with a fingerprint or a photograph. Miss Marple, he began, scratching his neck accordingly. "I know you've probably already heard, but checking in with all to residents who received these notes. I imagine most of Rose Hill knows by now," said kindly. "It's not often we have a mystery without even a body." He smiled, half grateful. "True, I suppose you've seen Millicent's letter. She brought it over this morning. And your thoughts, Miss?" Marple gave him a long look, as though deciding whether he would be able to hear what she had to say. "My thoughts," she said slowly, "are that people rarely act without reason, and fear is a powerful reason. Whoever sent these letters is trying to awaken something that's been sleeping, and I rather think they've succeeded." Drew looked a bit flustered, pulling out his notebook. "Do you believe the sender is from Rose Hill?" "I believe," Miss Marple replied, "that Rose Hill has more secrets than even it knows." She paused, then added with quiet certainty, "And I believe this isn't over. In fact, it's only just begun." That night, the village slept with curtains drawn and doors double-locked. Miss Marple stayed up a little later than usual, rereading a chapter of Marcus Aurelius, and stirring her thoughts over a second cup of hot milk somewhere in the distance. Fox called out once, then fell silent. Hand in the postbox outside Evelyn March's cottage, unseen by anyone in the moonlight, was a second letter. Chapter 2. The ink beneath her fingernails the following morning broke with a breeze that carried the faint scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. The early light filtered through the curtains of Rose Hill like a secret being told slowly, gently, as though it feared being overheard. There was nothing gentle about what was waiting outside Evelyn March's. The writ was found not by her, but by Mrs. Dora Reeves, who had taken it upon herself to deliver a borrowed hymn book to Evelyn before breakfast. Dora liked to be helpful. She also liked to tell, be the first to know things, and if she happened to pass by a window and glance in with innocent curiosity, well, it was hardly a crime. But this morning, her knock went unanswered. She peered through the front window and saw that the sitting room was as it had been the day before: piano stool tucked in neatly, books in perfect stacks, cushion on the armchair puffed just so, but Evelyn was not inside. The door was unlocked. That alone sent a sharp little tremor through Dora's spine. Rose Hill wasn't a place where people locked their doors unless they were going away for the weekend or avoiding visitors. Evelyn wasn't there. "Evelyn," Dora called, pushing the door open a little farther. "It's only my dear." No response. The stillness inside was immediate and wrong, like walking tomb. Photograph instead of a home. She took a cautious step forward, then another, and that's when she saw it. There, on the doormat inside, was a letter identical in appearance to the other's thick cream envelope, neatly folded, no stamp, no return address. It had been pushed halfway through the letter. Boxend now rested like an accusation, but this time something was different. This envelope had a smudge, not from dirt, not from fingers, but from ink. Dark, wetted, fresh, as though whoever left it had done so moments ago. Ma stepped backward with a sharp intake of breath. Her eyes darted up the stairs as if Evelyn might suddenly appear, but the cottage remained silent too silent. She did what any sensible woman would do. She turned on her heel and went straight to Constable Drew. By 10 o'clock, the village had begun to stir with new gossip. Evelyn March was missing her shoes, still rested by the fireplace. Her handbag was in its usual place, and the kettle had been recently boiled. Butch was nowhere to be found. Her bed had been slept in, the sheets still slightly crumpled, and her nightdress was folded neatly at the foot. Nothing suggested panic, nothing, that is, except the ink-stained letter. This one was different. Saw what you did at the pond. I remembered the sound. You will tune. Miss Marple was standing by the flower stall in the village square when Shahart. It was Mrs. Bickham, the vicar's wife, who delivered the news in a flurry of anxious whispers, as though describing the signs of a coming storm. And she's gone, Jane. Just gone, I always thought. Evelyn was such a stable girl, didn't always punctual, neat as a pin, never a word of complaint. But now, this a vanished woman, and a message like that, left behind. It's terrifying. Miss Marple turned her face toward the square. People had begun to gather in little clusters, speaking in hushed tones. The calm of Rose Hill was beginning to ripple, as though someone had thrown a pebble into its glassy surface, and no one yet knew how far the rings were spread. Tell me something. To you schedulely, do you recall anything ever happening at the pond? Mrs. Bickham citated the pond. Well, there was that poor boy who drowned years ago, wasn't there, Tommy? Large, the blacksmith's nephew, summer of I don't know, 1939. Perhaps, or was it 40? It was before the war. And it was dreadful, dreadful, Miss Marple echoed. But surely you're not suggesting that has anything to do with this? Marple didn't reply. Her mind was already turning, reaching back into the dusty corners of memory where odd details often and hid a tearful mother in the church steps, a funeral with no answers, a whisper about a child whose haunt had been near the water. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple received a visitor of her own. Not another letter, thankfully, but young Matthew Tilby, the grocer's son, who had taken to bringing deliveries to her doorstep in exchange for the occasional ginger biscuit and conversation. I was 13, curious, and as watchful as a cat. I saw something, he said, biting into a biscuit and wiping the crumbs on his sleeve at the back of Miss March's placeboard. All the shouting started. Miss Marple looked up from her embroidery goon. Dear, there was a man, he said, standing in the trees behind the cottage, just standing, not moving, watching the window do. You know who it was? Matthew shook. He shed. Couldn't see his face. He had a hat pulled low, but he was holding something, a folder or a book. I don't know. I thought it was weird. Miss Marple set down her needle. And what did you do? Ran, Matthew admitted, with a sheepish grinded want to get in trouble. She smiled, a wise instinct. The image stayed with her long after Matthew had gone. A man in the trees watching, holding something possibly connected to Evelyn, possibly the letter writer himself. It was still early in the investigation. Already, Miss Marple could feel the familiar shiver of threads beginning to topple together. She didn't believe in coincidences, not where people were concerned, and for letters with unsettling messages, each one echoing something from long ago, didn't happen by chance. Someone was trying to open old wounds. The handwriting was deliberate. The tone was personal. And Evelyn March, the most quietly forgettable person in the village, had become its first true disappearance. In nearly a decade that evening, Constable Drew visited Miss Marple again. He looked tired, more than tired, overwhelmed. She's not at Thecatage, not at her sister's, not at the church. He said, "We've got the dogs out by the pond now." "Good," Miss Marple said simply. He looked down at his notes. "You think these letters are from someone with a personal vendetta?" "I think," she sagely, "that someone is very good at remembering and even better at marking others do the same." Drew looked at her. "So you believe Evelyn's disappearance is connected to something from the past off you, of course. What else do people kill for, Mr. Drew, if not the past, or what they believe it still?" Owsdom, he swallowed hard and flipped his notebook closed. "I'll let you know what we find near the pond." Miss Marple nodded once, then turned back to the chessboard she had set up on her tea table. Black Queen had been taken, only the white remained, surrounded on all sides, careless. She murmured to herself, moving a rook into place, but not irreversible, not yet. Chapter 3: A Name, and thus the path to Rose Hill. Pond curved gently through a narrow corridor of Willis-Thayer, long green arms trailing low over the water, as though in mourning. The pond had once been a lively spot, children catching frogs in jam jars, couples strolling with hands shilly clasped. But in recent years it had grown more neglected, more forgotten. That suited Miss Marple. Just fine people always forgot the places they didn't want to remember, and in her experience, that's precisely where secrets like to hide. When the constable's whistle sounded from the north end of the pond that morning, half the village had already gathered at the edge of the footpath, craning their necks, clutching cardigans, and muttering theories that grew bolder with every retelling thief found. Evelyn's shoe, first, just one tucked beneath a fallen log, not torn or blooded, just sitting there like someone had stepped out of it mid-thought. Then came the scarf, pale lilac, with small embroidered daisies. Dora Reeves confirmed it was Evelyn's favorite. She had worn it nearly every Sunday at noon. Constable Drew had called in backup from the nearest station, and they'd cordoned off the area with tape that looked far too modern against the pond's sleepy backdrop. The search doxeled them deeper into the brambles, down a side trail toward an abandoned tool sheddings used by the groundskeepers of a long, defunct cricket club, and at waist there, tucked between a rusted watering can and an overturned bench, that they found something else. A name written in dust on the inside of the shed's window pane. 3 simple letters, drawn with a finger deliberate and clear. M.A.R. Could be anything, Drew muttered, scribbling in his notebook. Miss Marple, standing behind him with her coat buttoned against the morning chill, tilted her head. "And yet it's not anything, is it? It's written for some Yanetto find. People only write names in dust when they want them to be read. It could be initials: Mark Arnold, Ridgeway, Margaret Ann, Raleigh, or March." "Yes, it's Miss Marple," said Evelyn. March. Drew looked uncomfortable. "Well, we can't jump to conclusions." "No, of course not, but one must never ignore breadcrumbs simply because they lead to uncomfortable places." Drew sighed, flipping to a fresh page. Still no sign of her, and no new letters though. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," Miss Marple murmured. The 5th letter was discovered by Percy Gibbons, the gravedigger, who had the misfortune of finding it pinned to the church notice board that afternoon. He'd assumed at first it was a flyer, someone advertising piano lessons or dog walking, but the moment he touched it, the paper came loose in his hand, and he saw it for what it was: thick parchment, handwritten message, signature. This time the message was longer. "Webbery, what we cannot face, but the ground remembers, and now so will you." And Miss Marple read the note with silent attention. She felt the air shift around her shoulders. Something had changed. The tone was colder now, less poetic, more final. She asked to keep the letter, and Drew didn't argue. Percy had already gone home muttering about giving the graveyard a wide berth until things settled down. She spent the evening in her parlor, the letter laid out beside the others, eyes flicking from one to the next. You remember what happened? You were there. He saw you. I saw you. You lied when it mattered most. The sound, the pond, Webbery. What we cannot face. And then Evelyn was going to miss. Marple leaned back in her chair, knitting needles resting in her lap. It was all pointing somewhere, but not at Evelyn. No, Evelyn wasn't the cause. She was the consequence. The tremor following the earthquake, which meant someone else was next. The next day, a single envelope was discovered on the windowsill of the Rose Hill Library, placed right beside the morning paper, but this one didn't want to be opened. The librarian, Mr. Cedric Howell, a balding man with stiff trousers and nervous eyes, read it, blanched, and then fainted straight into the biographies. When revived, he could barely speak. The note had addressed him directly by name, and it had ended with a sentence that would echo through the village hall. Day your silence cost a life. Now you learn how it feels. Miss Marple arrived as they were helping him into a chair. He trembled like a man who had glimpsed a ghost in the card catalog. She looked at the letter only briefly, then she did something that startled even herself. She sat down and wrote a letter of her on it. Wasn't long, just a few lines. I don't know who you are, but I know what ya want. You've made your point, but revenge is a blunt instrument. Come speak to me, I'm listening, J.M. She folded it, sealed it with her initials, and handed it to young Matthew Tilby. Put this on the bench at the pond. Tuck it under a stone, so it won't blow away. And don't tell anyone, not even your parents. Matthew looked pleased, if a bit bewildered. Is this a secret mission? Yes, Miss Marple said softly, but only the kind that requires watching and waiting. That night, Rose Hill felt like a different place. The bakery closed, early curtains were drawn tightly. No one lingered on porches or stoops. The gasophides soured into something quieter, something close to fear. Miss Marple sat in her parlor, her lamps dimmed, watching the shadows move outside her window. The wind had picked up, rustling the rose bushes and whispering through the gaps in the fence somewhere not far. A fox screamed, and then a knock. She rose slowly, heart steady but alert, and opened the door, but no one was there. Only an envelope, no handwriting, no message inside it, a single sheet of blank paper, perfectly smooth, no creases, no ink put along the edge. Faintly visible in the lamplight was the outline of a smudge, a fingerprint in ink. It was small, too small to be a man's, too thin, too elegant. It could only belong to a woman. Miss Marple stared at it a long time. Then she folded the letter back into its envelope, placed it in a drawer beneath the sewing kit, and locked the drawer with an old brass kitamaro. She thought she would ask the vicar a very specific question about a boy named Tommy Larch and the woman who'd sworn she hadn't been near. The day he died. Chapter 4. The woman at the water's edge, Sunday, in Rose Hill, had always carried ascertained rhythm. Hymns drifting through open chapel windows, the gentle clink of teaspoons against bone china, and the rustle of the Rose Hill Gazette folded neatly beneath breakfast plates. But this particular Sunday was restless. The wind blew too sharply through the trees, and there was something in the air that even the church bells couldn't soothe. Miss Marple left her cottage earlier than usual, walking cane in hand, her pace measured but purposeful. She wasn't headed to church, not yet. She was headed towards someone who had spent the past 20 years pretending not to remember anything at all. The vicar's wife, Mildred Beckham, answered the door with flour on her apron and guilt in her eyes. Oh, Jane, I hadn't expected. Forgive the intrusion, Mildred. Kay, I wondered if I might speak with you for just a moment alone. Mildred hesitated. I was just about to set the bread to rise. I'll be quick, Miss Marple said, and her smile was warm enough to disguise the firmness in her tone. Dish sat in the little breakfast parlor. The room smelled of lavender, polish, and wood smoke. On the table, dew sat under a damp cloth like a secret waiting to rise. I've been thinking, Miss Marple began gently about. Tommy, large, Mildred, froze, just slightly, the kind all freeze that wouldn't be noticed unless one was paying very close attention. But Miss Marple, of course, was Tommy, she said, after a beat, feigning thoughtfulness. The blacksmith's nephew, wasn't he, poor boy, drowned in a pond, summer of 1940. Dreadful business, terrible for the family, such an active child. You saw him, thought Day. The sentence landed like a drought. Cup not shouted, but loud all teasing. I know, Jane, I don't believe you were saying. Miss Marple continued by Morathon, one person sitting on the bench by the water, and someone remembered. Mildred's mouth moved as if to deny it, but nothing came. She looked, suddenly smaller than her apron, like a child caught near a broken window. Didn't you, beggin'? I wasn't. Did you see what happened, Mildred? There was a silence, then a real moan. The kind of silence that comes only when the body is deciding whether to leer. Confess, I saw him go in, she whispered finally. It was so fast, he was chasing something. Maybe a frog, I called out. But I didn't move. I didn't get up. I just froze. She closed her eyes. I don't know why. I've never forgiven myself. Miss Marple didn't offer comfort, not yet. And you never told anyone. Mildred shook her head. I was newly married. The village didn't know me well. I didn't want them thinking I'd lead a child drown without doing anything. Was there anyone else there? No one I could see. Miss Marple leaned back. She wasn't angry. She wasn't surprised. But something had clicked into place. Something sharp there. Was a girl, Mildred said, suddenly voice shaking a few paces behind. She was watching me. I'd forgotten until now. Do you remember her face? No. Only her dress blue with daisies. Miss Marple froze. Lilac scarf daisies, imported Evelyn Marchette. Midday. The church was full, but not peaceful. The pews rustled with ease as conversations lowered to whispers when Constable Drew entered, and the vicar's sermon, though devout, as always, could notice the tension away from the real question haunting every face. Where was Evelyn March? Miss Marple remained outside. She had no need for pews today. Instead, she walked to the back of the chapel where the graves grew older, endless, tended a few tombstones, leaned like tired men. Others had lost their names, torn and rained. She stopped before the grave of Thomas. Large, 1931 to 1940, a guild, a secret, and a witness. She knelt not easily, but deliberately and brushed. The moss from the stone's base, something caught her eye, a faint indentations in the soil, circular, pressed in a boot heel, and Another's Miller fresh. Someone had stood here recently. She looked around, but the churchyard was empty, just her, the wind, and the ghost. That afternoon, the phone rang at her cottage. She picked up, expecting a worried villager, or perhaps Dora Reeves, asking if she'd heard anything new. Buted. Wasn't. Miss Marple, a woman's voice, low controlled, almost expressionless. Yes, you want to know who I am. I'd like to understand why you're doing this. Ill-ready. No, you see things. You've always seen things. I see hurt, Miss Marple said. I see someone who feels forgotten. There was a pause. He drowned because no one helped him, the voice said finally, and they went on. They had picnics. They laughed at weddings, as if a child's death meant nothing. And you think punishment will heal that? I think remembering is the only justice left. The line went dead. Miss Marple sat very still for a long time. She replayed the voice, the cadence, not familiar, not locale net. Evelyn, someone else. And yet that evening, as dusk slid over Rose Hill, like a shawl over weary shoulders, another note was discovered, this time at the village hall, pinned to the wall. Beside the Mayfair poster, you all saw, you all said nothing. One more must remember, one more must pay him. Constable Drew, read it with a frown. She's escalating. Miss Marple said nothing. He added. Miss Marple gave a slow nod. Yes, a woman not young, but not old, educated perhaps, careful with words. You sound like you've met her. I think I have, she said quietly though. I didn't know it at the time. Drew looked worried. You're not? Safe, Miss Marple? None of us are, she replied. Not until we face the truth. That night, rainful in slow, cold sheets across the village mist. Marple sat by her hearth, watching the fire crackle in thoughtful silence. The letters folded and arranged like. A strange paper garden rested on her table. One more must pay. She wondered who it would be and whether the price had already been decided. Chapter 5. Echoes of silence. The morning after the rain was a hesitant one. The clouds clung low, reluctant to let the sun break through gent. The village moved with a sluggishness that matched the damp chill settling into bones and spirits alike. Usual bustle at the bakery and the grocer's was subdued conversation, cautious, as if each villager feared disturbing the fragile calm that had replaced the morning's tempest. Miss Marple, however, was already awakened, stirring before dawn, her mind turning over the events like pages in an old book, dog-eared, worn but rich with meaning. She made herself a cup of tea, sat by the window, watching the mist curl over the rose bushes and the first few birds cautiously returning to their morning chorus. The unanswered question that echoed louder than the church bells was why the letter writer had chosen these particular people: the widowed Mrs. Tolworth, missing Evelyn March, the retired schoolmaster, Mr. Prowl, the doctor Arthur Melling, and now the librarian Cedric Howell. They did not seem connected on the surface, but Miss Marple knew better. There were threads beneath. The surface strands of shared history or long-buried secrets. Her thoughts were interrupted by Thesof's knock on the door. It was Matthew Tilby, the grocer's son, looking genuinely serious for a boy of 13. Miss Marple, he said, quietly stepping inside. Without waiting for an invitation, Mr. Prowse, keeper, told my father something strange. Miss Marple gestured toward the armchair, and Matthew took a seat. What did she? Said Matthew, shifted on the chair, eyes fixed on the patterned carpet. She said, my prose study was disturbed, books out of place, papers scattered like someone had been searching. Miss Marple's fingers folded around her teacup. And when did this happen? Last night, after the rain. She found it this morning. Miss Marple nodded, slowly dead. She'll see anyone know? But the back door was open, unlocked. Matthew's words settled heavily in the room. The past, it seemed, was clawing its way back with more than letters. By mid-morning, Miss Marple was at Mr. Ilmore Prowse's house, a neat brick cottage near the edge of the village green. Elma was a man of habit. His days, once filled with lessons and lectures, now passed in quiet reading and occasional visits to the pub. He greeted her with the usual polite reserve, but the faint crease of worry on his forehead betrayed him. My housekeeper told me this morning that my study had been rifled through, he said, leading her into the small room lined with bookshelves. I cannot imagine who would want to disturb a retired schoolmaster. Miss Marple carefully examined the papers scattered across the desk. There were letters, notes, and old photographs, yellowed with time and worn at the edges. One photograph caught her attention. It was a black and white image of a group of children standing near the pond, their faces bright with summer smiles. Among them was a young woman in a blue dress with daisies embroidered on the hem. Evelyn March. She showed the picturetto. Mr. Prowl, who nodded gravely. Yes, Evelyn. She was the daughter of the village postmaster. I was her teacher for a brief time, for she left to study in London. In this photograph, Mr. Prowl hesitated at Wostakin the summer before the war. I remember, because the children had all planned a picnic by the pond. But the day after, Tommy Large drowned. Miss Marple's gaze softened. It was a datage changed Rose Hill. Yes, he said quietly, and yet it was not spoken of. Mac. People preferred to forget until now later that afternoon. Miss Marple visited Dr. Arthur Melling, the retired village doctor who had 10 generations of Rose Hill families. He received her with a weary smile and invited her into his study walls, lined with medical texts and fragment certificates. "Miss Marple," he said, pouring tea with a steady hand, "you've come about the letters, I presume." She nodded. "And Evelyn March Desiprin's?" He sighed. "I fear these events are connected more deeply than an Anne realizes." "What do you mean?" Dr. Melling looked away for a moment. "Years ago, shortly after Tommy Larch's death, there was a woman who came to me for help. She was distressed. Said she knew something about the accident, but sheriffs to speak further." "Do you remember her name?" "No, only Thatch had striking handwriting. Precise, unusual." Miss Marple's heart skipped the handwriting on the letters. They nodded. "It was the same. I thought it was a coincidence at the time sometimes." Miss Marple said softly, "Coincidence is just the truth." Waiting time understood as the day faded into evening. Miss Marple returned home with more questions than answers. She sat by the fire. The letters spread before her like scattered clues. Who was the woman with the handwriting? So carefully learned what was the secret buried beneath Rose Hill's placid surfacing. What price would be paid for silence? Now, outside, the wind stirred once more, tilling the window panes and carrying with it a whisper of something long forgotten, something waiting to be remembered. Chapter 6. Shadows in the ashes. The following morning, Rose Hill awoke beneath the pale, reluctant sun, its beams struggling through a canopy of gray clouds. The village seemed quieter than usual, as though its residents were still holding their breath, waiting for something inevitable to unfold. The church bells stole their solemn notes, echoing through the narrow lanes, mingling with the distant chirping of sparrows and the faint rustle of leaves. Miss Marple, however, was already out of her cottage, briskly walking toward the village square. She had a sense, an unshakable feeling that the next clue was closer than anyone dared admit in her way. She paused outside the modest home of Dora Reeves. The post Nestrezu had become an unofficial hub of information since the letters began arriving. Dora was watering her front garden, glancing nervously toward the skies, though afraid of the impending rain. "Good morning, Miss Marple." Dora greeted her with a tentative smile. "Good morning, Dora. Have you heard anything new?" Dora shook her head. "Only whispers, Jane, but there's talk of a fire." Miss Marple frowned. "A fire?" "Yes, at the old mill on the outskirts of town. It burned down late last night." That was news. The old mill had long been abandoned, a relic of Rose Hill's past industry, standing as a skeletal shadow of what once was. Its crumbling stone walls and broken window shade made it a favorite spot for local children's stares and youthful mischief, but no one expected it to become the center of something far graver. Miss Marple thanked Dora and set off toward the mill, her cane tapping rhythmically on the cobblestones. When she arrived, a small crowd had gathered behind the police tape. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air, mixing with the damp earth, and charred wood flames had been extinguished, but the damage was evident. Blackened beams collapsed, roof sections, and ash scattered like winter snow. Constable Drew was on duty, his expression serious as he answered questions from curious villagers. "Miss Marple," he said, spotting her approach, "glad you're here. We're just trying to figure out if it was accidental or deliberate." Any witnesses? Few said they saw a figure leaving the mill late last night, tall, slender, wearing a dark coat and a hat, but it was too dark to make out more. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Has anyone found anything unusual inside?" Drew shook his head. "Not yet." Firefighters were more focused on putting it out than searching for clues. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the tape. After a brief consultation, Drew allowed her to step closer. Miss Marple moved carefully through the debris, her eyes scanning the ground. The the scorched shed wood, the twisted metal. Near a fallen beam, she spotted a small piece of parchment, partially burned, but still legible kneeling. She picked it up carefully. It was another note, written in the same strange, precise handwriting. Ashes reveal what the flame tries to hide, and Miss Marple's breath caught the message, was unmistakably warning, a message and a challenge all in one. Later that day, she sat with Matthew Talby and shared the note. The handwriting is the same, isn't it? Matthew asked, eyes wide. Yes. Miss Marple replied, and it means the writer is watching us, testing us. Matthew frowned, but why the mill? Miss Marple smiled faintly, because places like that hold memories. Sometimes the ruins are more telling than the intact walls. She looked around her quiet cottage. A evening drew near. The flickering shadows cast by the hearth danced like ghosts on the walls, reminding her of the secrets that whispered beneath Rose Hill's tranquil surface. Someone is trying to make us remember, she murmured, and they are willing to burn the past to bring it to light. Night, as the village slept beneath a blanket of stars, a figure moved silently through the streets, cloaked in shadow and careful not to make a sound. Stranger slipped into the mill's ruins once more. From a hidden pocket, they withdrew a small notebook, flipping through pages filled with carefully practiced handwriting. One phrase caught their eye, underlined twice. One more must pay. With a phantom-most imperceptible smile, the figure pressed a finger against the ink-stained page. This time, the voice whispered, "It will be you." And then, like a ghost swallowed by the night, the figure vanished. Chapter 7. The Whisper in the Library. The Rose Hill Library, a modest stone building nestled between the bakery and the post office, was usually a sanctuary of quiet and order. Rows of neatly shelved books, the faint scent of aged paper, and the soft footsteps of leaders seeking refuge in stories or knowledge made it a comforting presence. Amid the village's unfolding unease that morning, however, the library felt different. It was charged with attention that had nothing to do with overdue books or misplaced volumes. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Cedric Howell, the librarian, was already there when Miss Marple arrived. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by an edge of nervousness visible in the way he adjusted his spectacles and glanced repeatedly at the closed doors. Jane, he greeted her in a low voice. "Thank you for coming. I don't quite know holes to turn to." Miss Marple gave a reassuring smile. "Tell me everything, Cedric." He led her to a quiet corner, away from the few patrons who had trickled in. The letter he began, the one pinned to the notice board, read it. Miss Marple said softly, "It's direct, personal." It frightened me enough to come in early to try to understand if it was some sort of threat. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Any strangers? Any odd visitors?" Cedric shook his head. "No, but I have been finding books out of place, particularly the local history section." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Local historian?" "Yes, books about Rose Hill, its people, and strangely enough, about the old mill and the pond." She nodded. Slowly, "Someone is searching for something buried in our past." Cedric hesitated. "There's more. Last night, just before closing, I thought I heard a whisper near the stacks, but when I turned there was no one." "A whisper?" Miss Marple echoed, intrigued. "Yes, almost like a voice calling a name." "Whose name?" Cedric swallowed. "Mine." "Cedric." Miss Marple guarded him thoughtfully. "Fear makes the ordinary seem extraordinary." Cedric managed a weak smile, perhaps, but with everything happening, it's hard not to wonder if I'm being watched later. Miss Marple wandered through the Aslasher fingers, lightly brushing the spines of the books. The weight of years seemed to settle on her shoulders. In these volumes, she thought, lay forgotten stories, unspoken truths, and the roots of the mystery. Now gripping Rose Hill, her hand paused on a leather-bound tome about the village's history. She pulled it from the shelf and opened to a chapter titled "The Tragedy At the pond, the pages described the drowning of Tommy Larch, and the silence that followed there was mention of a woman seen near the water. Her identity, never confirmed, bed whispered about in hushed tones. Miss Marple closed the book with a sigh the evening as she sat by her window knitting. Needles clicking softly, a shadow passed across the garden. She looked up sharply, but saw nothing but the swaying branches. A sudden chill crept over her as thought past had reached out through time, brushing against her very skin through handwriting. The letters, the disappearances, they were all threads in a tapestry woven long ago, but frayed, now threatening to unravel. Completely, she folded her knitting and reached for the drawer where she kept the letters. One more must pay, but who? Her eyes drifted to the empty spaces in the village, the mill ruins, the pond, caselent, library shelves, and a quiet resolve settled over her. She would find the answer before the next shadow claimed another. Chapter 8. The footsteps behind the wall, the days in rows. Hill grew heavier with silence. The village seemed to shrink beneath an invisible weight. The laughter of children, muffled conversations, cut short in the familiar footfalls along cobblestones measured with extra caution. Even the birds appeared, subdued, their songs tentative and sparse. Miss Marple noticed it most in fast paces between words, those pregnant pauses that spoke louder than any gossip or accusation. People were afraid, not just for themselves, but for the secrets they carried for. The past they had buried. One afternoon, Miss Marple was summoned to the village hall by Constable Drew, who looked unusually grave. "Jane, you might want to see this," he said, leading her through the quiet corridors to the meeting room there. A small group had gathered. Mr. Cedric Howell, visibly shaken, Mrs. Toller, pale but determined, and Elma Prowl, whose usual composure was framed. "What is it?" Miss Marple asked. Drew nodded toward the far wall where a loose section of plaster had been carefully removed, revealing a narrow space behind. "We found these yesterday," Drew said, pointing to a pair of worn shoes. Preceding a chair nearby, someone tried to hide them here. Miss Marple approached, her sharp eyes examining the faded leather. Dust settled on their soles. They wear women's shoes, delicate but sturdy, the kind that might have belonged to Zemian, accustomed to walking quietly. "Noticed there are footprints," Drew continued, leading her to the floor. "Small, fresh, they disappear just beyond the garden fence. Someone has been hiding in the village." Miss Marple murmured, watching, waiting. Cedric swallowed hard. "I heard footsteps last night coming from behind my library wall. I thought it was my imagination." Mrs. Toller shivered. "I've been hearing voices whispering through the hedges." Elma Prowl adjusted his glasses and has found this, produced a folded scrap of paper from his pocket. "The same handwriting. The truth hides where shadows fall. One must face the past orb, consumed by it." Miss Marple studied the note carefully. "The message grows clearer," she said, "and the threats more direct." That evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, pondering. The village had become a stage for a drama written years ago, played out now with increasing urgency. Her thoughts drifted to Evelyn. Mark still, Miss, into the pond, the mill, and the silent whispers behind library walls. There was one more place she had yet to visit. The old cottage at the end of Mill Lane, long empty, but once home to a woman named Margaret Ames. Margaret Ames had left Rose Hill abruptly 30 years ago, her departures routed in rumors and speculation. Some said she knew too much. Some said she took the truth with her under the cloak of dusk. Miss Marple made her way to the cottage. The air was thick with a scent of cut, wet earth, and decaying leaves. The windows were boarded up, and the garden had surrendered to wild ivy and thistles. She pushed open the creaking gate and stepped inside. The floorboards groaning beneath her feet. Inside, dust motes floated like tiny specters. In the fading light on a cracked wooden table lay a faded photograph of a woman, young, determined, eyes sharp, with unspoken stories. Miss Marple traced a finger along the edge. A sudden noise startled her, a soft, scuffling sound from the floor above. Ship bows, listening footsteps, light, deliberate. Someone was there. Not a ghost, a person, holding their breath, waiting. Chapter 9. The visitor in the attic, Miss Marple, stood frozen for a moment, her eyes straining to pierce the dimness above. The footsteps had ceased, but the silence that followed felt heavy, expectant, like the calm before a storm. She could almost hear the quiet ticking off time itself in the stale air. Slowly, she climbed the narrow staircase, she'd step, creaking beneath her careful weight. The attic was a small, cramped space under the pitched roof, littered with broken furniture, empty boxes, and forgotten memories. There, near a dusty trunk, a figure stirred. Day. Woman, young, slender, her face partially obscured by shadows and tangled hair hoods. There, Miss Marple's voice was calm, but carried the authority of unaccustomed to confronting secrets. The woman startled, then straightened, clutching a bundle of papers tightly to her chest. I didn't mean to frighten you, she whispered. I just needed a place to hide. Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes softening. You're safe here for now, Boutille, are you? And why hide in Margaret Ames's cottage? Woman hesitated, then unfolded the papers, revealing a collection of handwritten notes, old photographs, and letters, all bearing the same peculiar handwriting. Miss Marple had come to recognize. My name is Mary, she said. I've been following the letters, trying to uncover the truth about what happened all those years ago. Miss Marple nodded slowly. And what have you found? Mary took a deep breath. There was an accident at the pond. Yes, but it wasn't an accident. Someone pushed Tommy Larch in, and the woman who saw it, Margaret Ames, she tried to expose the truth, but the village silenced her. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Silenced how? By making her leave, spreading rumors, destroying her reputation. She never returned. And you believe the letters, the disappearances, the fire, all connected to this? Mary nodded. Someone wants the past to stay buried, but I won't let that happen. Miss Marple reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Mary's arm. You're brave to come here, but you must be careful. The shadows you're chasing are dangerous. Mary looked up, determination shining in her eyes. I'm ready. Together, they began to piece together the fragments of a story long hidden. A story of betrayal, fear, and the desperate need for justice. Chapter 10. Secrets buried deep. The attic air was thick with dust and unspoken truths as Miss Marple and Mary spread the collection of papers. Crossed, rickety wooden floor, each photograph, letter, and scribbled note was a piece of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered decades before, left to fade in shadow and silence. Mary pointed to an old photograph of a young woman standing beside the pond, her posture, tense, eyes fierce. That's Margaret Ames, she said softly, the woman who tried to tell the truth. Miss Marple studied the image carefully. The same woman whose name had echoed throughout whispered village tales, and whose sudden disappearance had become secret too. Inconvenient to discuss openly. Tell me about this, Miss Marple said, tapping a letter written in the same peculiar handwriting as the threatening notes. Mary's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The letter was dated just days before. Margaret left Rose Hill. Its words were desperate, pleading for someone to listen to. Believe they think silence will save them, but I will speak. I will make them hear. The pond took more than a boy. It took our conscience. If I go silent, it will be because I am silenced. But the truth will out, even if it takes a lifetime. Ma'am. Miss Marple felt a shiver run down her spine. The letter wasn't just a threat or a warning. It was a declaration of courage. Who was Margaret trying to expose? She asked quietly. Mary looked away. That's what I'm trying to find out. So the names are hidden, coded in these notes and memories, but it's clear she suspected someone powerful. To me, The village protected Miss Marple nodded slowly. Its power can be a dangerous shield, especially in small communities where everyone knows everyone or thinks they do. They work it late into the night, piecing together accounts from old diaries, faded newspaper clippings, and whispered stories Mary had gathered from reluctant villages. A pattern emerged, a web of fear, loyalty, and unspoken crimes that had kept the village quiet for far too long, and now the web was unraveling. As dawn approached, Miss Marple leaned back against the attic wall, exhaustion weighing on her bones, but clarity brightened her mind. "We must tread carefully," she said. "The past has teeth. It bites those who pry too deeply." Mary nodded, determination undimmed. "But it's the only way to free Rose Hill from its ghosts." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Then we must be ready for whatever comes next." Outside, the first light of morning touched the village roofs, and the long hidden secrets of Rose Hill began to stir one simmer. Chapter 11. The Confession in the garden behind. Miss Marple's cottage was a haven of calm and of a ladrous list with secrets. Roses bloomed in muted colors beneath the soft morning light, their petals heavy with dew. It was here, amidst the familiar scent of earth and flowers, that Mary chose to reveal a truth she had long carried alone. Miss Marple poured 2 cups of tea and settled onto a wooden bench, her gaze content yet probing. "Okay, Mary, you've come far, but you can't carry this burden alone." Mary clasped her hands tightly, her eyes fixed on a patch of crocuses just beginning to bud. "There's something I haven't told you," she begged in voice barely above a day whisper. "Something I feared more than anything." Miss Marple waited patiently. "It's about the night Tommy Large died." Mary's breath caught and a tear traced a path down her cheek. "I was there," she confessed. "I saw what happened." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Tell me." Mary swallowed hard. "Tommy was chasing a frog by the pond, but then someone pushed him in. I saw it. I tried to shout, but my voice failed me. I froze, and when Margaret tried to speak out, the villager against her." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Fear can silence the strongest voices." Mary looked up, meeting Miss Marple's steady gaze. "I ran away, left Rose Hill, because I couldn't live with the silence. And now I'm back. Because truth won't stay buried. Someone is forcing it to the surface." Miss Marple reached out, squeezing Mary's hand. "We will face it together." Afternoon, armed with Mary's confession, Miss Marple met with Constable Drew in the village council. The weight of years pressed heavily in the room as she laid out the fragments of truth they had uncovered. "There was an accident," she said calmly, "but it was no accident. A child was pushed, and a web of silence allowed the injustice to persist." Faces around the table paused. "But why now?" Drew asked. "Because the past demands justice, even after decades," Miss Marple replied, "and because Samian still carries the pain and the guilt." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Marple continued, "It's time for Rose Hill to confront its shadows, to speak openly, and to heal." A long silence followed. Then a voice broke through. The oldest member of the council, trembling but resolute. "We cannot keep fighting. The village deserves the truth." As evening settled, Miss Marple returned at home, feeling the heavy lift of hope mingled with fearing. The garden, the roses, seemed to glow softly in the twilight. The past was no longer a silent shadow. It was a story waiting to be told. Chapter 12. The Portrait of a Lie. The morning sun filtered softly through Bella's curtains of Rose Hill's village hall, casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floorboards. Today was the day Miss Marple had arranged for the villagers to gather to begin unraveling the tangled threads of a past long hidden beneath polite smiles and careful silences. Side the hall, faces familiar and wary assembled. The postmistress with her cautious glances, the blacksmith's wife clutching her shawl, the schoolmaster with eyes shadowed by regret, and many others whose secrets had hovered in fear. Like dust motes, Miss Marple stood at the front calm and composed. Yet her presence commanded attention. Beside her was Mary, the young woman whose courage had sparked a slow but steady awakening. In Rose Hill we gather here, Miss Marple began not to condemn, but to understand, to face truths that have lingered too long in shadows, and to begin healing the wounds they have caused. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mary stepped forward holding a faded portrait in her hands. It was an oil painting of a woman with stern eyes and a proud stance. Margaret Ames. This is the woman who tried to speak the truth, Mary said softly. She was cast out for it, her name dragged through whispers and suspicion. Miss Marple took the portrait, her gaze lingering on the determined features. The message grows clearer, she said, and the threats more direct. That evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, pondering. The village had become a stage for a drama written years ago, played out now with increasing urgency. Her thoughts drifted to Evelyn. Mark still missing, to the pond, the mill, and the silent whispers behind library walls. There was one more place she had yet to visit. The old cottage at the end of Mill Lane, long empty, but once home to a woman named Margaret Ames. Margaret Ames had left Rose Hill abruptly 30 years ago, her departures routed in rumors and speculation. Some said she knew too much, some said she took the truth with her under the cloak of dusk. Miss Marple made her way to the cottage. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The windows were boarded up, and the garden had surrendered to wild ivy and thistles. She pushed open the creaking gate and stepped inside. The floorboards groaning beneath her feet. Inside, dust motes floated like tiny specters. In the fading light on a cracked wooden table lay a faded photograph of a woman, young, determined, eyes sharp with unspoken stories. Miss Marple traced a finger along the edge. A sudden noise startled her, a soft, scuffling sound from the floor above. She paused, listening. Footsteps, light, deliberate. Someone was there. Not a ghost, a person, holding their breath, waiting. Chapter 9. The visitor in the attic. Miss Marple stood frozen for a moment, her eyes straining to pierce the dimness above. The footsteps had ceased, but the silence that followed felt heavy, expectant, like the calm before a storm. She could almost hear the quiet ticking off time itself in the stale air. Slowly she climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking beneath her careful weight. The attic was a small, cramped space under the pitched roof, littered with broken furniture, empty boxes, and forgotten memories. There, near a dusty trunk, a figure stood. A woman, young, slender, her face partially obscured by shadows and tangled hair. Whose? There, Miss Marple's voice was calm, but carried the authority of Ani, accustomed to confronting secrets. The woman startled, then straightened, lancing a bundle of papers tightly to her chest. I didn't mean to frighten you," she whispered. "I just needed a place to hide." Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes softening. "You're safe here for now, Buto, are you? And why hide in Margaret Ames's cottage?" Kay's woman hesitated, then unfolded the papers, revealing a collection of handwritten notes, old photographs, and letters, all bearing the same peculiar handwriting. Miss Marple had come to recognize. "My name is Mary," she said. "I've been following the letters, trying to uncover the truth about what happened all those years ago." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And what have you found?" Mary took a deep breath. "There was an accident at the pond." "Yes, but it wasn't an accident. Someone pushed Tommy Larch in, and the woman who saw it was Margaret Ames. She tried to expose the truth, but the village silenced her." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Silenced how?" "By making her leave, spreading rumors, destroying her reputation." She never returned. "And you believe the letters, the disappearances, the fire, all connected to this?" Mary nodded. "Someone wants the past to stay buried, but I won't let that happen." Miss Marple reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Mary's arm. "You're brave to come here, but you must be careful. The shadows you're chasing are dangerous." Mary looked up, determination shining in her eyes. "I'm ready." Together, they began to piece together the fragments of a story long hidden. It's a story of betrayal, fear, and a desperate need for justice. Chapter 10, Secrets Buried Deep. The attic air was thick with dust and unspoken truths as Miss Marple and Mary spread the collection of papers. Across rickety wooden floor, each photograph, letter, and scribbled note was a piece of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered decades before, left to fade in shadow and silence. Mary pointed to an old photograph of a young woman standing beside the pond, her posture tense, eyes fierce. "That's Margaret Ames," she said softly, "the woman who tried to tell the truth." Miss Marple studied the image carefully. The same woman whose name had echoed through whispered village tales and whose sudden disappearance had become Ascaret too inconvenient to discuss openly. "Tell me about this," Miss Marple said, tapping a letter written in the same peculiar handwriting as the threatening notes. Mary's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The letter was dated just days before. "Margaret left Rose Hill." Its words were desperate, pleading for someone to listen to. "Believe they think silence will save them, but I will speak. I will make them hear. The pond took Moretha and a boy. It took our conscience. If I go silent, it will be because I am silence, but the truth will out, even if it takes a lifetime." Ma'am, Miss Marple felt a shiver run down her spine. The letter wasn't just a threat or a warning, it was a declaration of courage. Who was Margaret trying to expose? She asked quietly. Mary looked away. "That's what I'm trying to find out. Are hidden, coded in these notes and memories, but it's clear she suspected someone powerful." The village protected. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Power can be a dangerous shield, especially in small communities where everyone knows everyone or thinks they do. They work it late into the night, piecing together accounts from old diaries, faded newspaper clippings, and whispered stories Mary had gathered from reluctant villages. A pattern emerged, a web of fear, loyalty, and unspoken crimes that had kept the village quiet for far too long. And now that web was unraveling as dawn approached. Miss Marple leaned back against the attic wall, exhaustion weighing on her bones, but clarity brightened her mind. "We must tread carefully," she said. "The past has teeth. It bites those who pry too deeply." Mary nodded, determination undimmed. "But it's the only way to free Rose Hill from its ghosts." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Then we must be ready for whatever comes next." Outside, the first light of morning touched the village roofs and the long hidden secrets of Rose Hill began to stir once summer. Chapter 11, The Confession in the Garden. The garden behind Miss Marple's cottage was a haven of calm and of voluptuousness, with secrets. Roses bloomed in muted colors beneath the soft morning light, their petals heavy with dew. It was here, amidst the familiar scent of earth and flowers, that Mary chose to reveal the truth she had long carried alone. Miss Marple poured 2 cups of tea and settled onto a wooden bench, her gaze gentle, yet probing. "Mary, you've come far, but you can't carry this burden alone." Mary clasped her hands tightly, her eyes fixed on a patch of crocuses just beginning to bud. "There's something I haven't told you," Shebegan voice, barely above a day whisper. "Something I feared more than anything." Miss Marple waited patiently. "It's about the night Tommy Large died." Mary's breath caught, and a tear traced a path down her cheek. "I was there," she confessed. "I saw what happened." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Tell me." Mary swallowed hard. "Tommy was chasing a frog by the pond, but then someone pushed him in. I saw it. I tried to shout, but my voice failed me. I froze, and when Margaret tried to speak out, the village turned against her." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Fear can silence the strongest voices." Mary looked up, meeting Miss Marple's steady gaze. "I ran away," leapt Rose Hill, "because I couldn't live with the silence. And now I'm back. Because the truth won't stay buried. Someone is forcing it to the surface." Miss Marple reached out, squeezing Mary's hand. "We will face it together." Tate. Afternoon. Armed with Mary's confession, Miss Marple met with Constable Drew and the village council. The weight of years pressed heavily in the room as she laid out the fragments of truth they had uncovered. "There was an accident," she said calmly, "but it was no accident. A child was pushed, and a web of silence allowed the injustice to persist." Faces around the table paused. "But why now?" Drew asked. "Because the past demands justice, even after decades," Miss Marple replied. "And because Sumian still carries the pain and the guilt." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Marple continued. "It's time for Rose Hill to confront its shadows, to speak openly, and to heal." A long silence followed. Then a voice broke through. The oldest member of the council, trembling but resolute. "We cannot keep fighting. The village deserves the truth." As evening settled, Miss Marple returned home, feeling the heavy lift of hope mingled with fearing. The garden, the roses, seemed to glow softly in the twilight. The past was no longer a silent shadow. It was a story waiting to be told. Chapter 12. The Portrait of a Lie. The morning sun filtered softly through the leafless curtains of Rose Hill's village hall, casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floorboards. Today was the day Miss Marple had arranged for the villagers to gather to begin unraveling the tangled threads of a past long hidden beneath polite smiles and careful silences. Inside the hall, faces familiar and wary assembled. The postmistress, with her cautious glances, the blacksmith's wife, clutching her shawl, the schoolmaster with eyes shadowed by regret, and many others whose secrets had hovered in fear like dust to moles. Miss Marple stood at the front calm and composed. Yet her presence commanded attention. Beside her was Mary, the young woman whose courage had sparked a slow but steady awakening in Rose Hill. "We gather here," Miss Marple began, "not to condemn, but to understand, to face truth, said have lingered too long in shadows, and to begin healing the wounds the heave caused." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mary stepped forward, holding a faded portrait in her hands. It was an oil painting of a woman with stern eyes and a proud stance. "Margaret Ames. This is the woman who tried to speak the truth," Mary said softly. "She was cast out for it, her name dragged through whispers and suspicion." Miss Marple took the portrait, her gaze lingering on the determined features. "Margaret was not alone," Miss Marple said. "Many here knew what happened that day by the pond, and yet few dared to speak." She paused, letting the weight of silent societal secrets may protect us, but they also imprison us. It is time to break free. One by one, villagers began to speak, tentative at first, then with growing strength, sharing memories, confessions, and regrets. The pond, the mill, the droning of Tommy Large, all came alive in their words. The D Hall, once heavy with fear, became a place of reckoning. After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed till the crisp afternoon, Miss Marple and Mary lingered by the door. "The first step is always the hardest," Mary said. Miss Marple nodded, "but on staking the path forward becomes clearest." They walked back through the village. The roses along the lanes seemed to bloom a little brighter, as though Rose Hill self was awakening from a long, troubled sleep. And in that moment, Miss Marple felt a quiet hope settle over her, a belief that even the deepest wounds could one day be healed. Chapter 13. Footsteps in the night. Village of Rose Hill, though awakened to its past, still bore the weight, often spoken. Fear's evening descended like a soft shroud, turning the narrow lanes and thatched rooftops into shadows and whispers. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very earth waited for the next chapter of the unfolding story. Miss Marple sat by the window in her cozy parlor, the glow of a single lamp casting gentle light over the neat layering letters and photographs spread across her table. She was stitching asmo patch onto one of her favorite shawls, but her mind was elsewhere tuned too. The faint sounds of the village settling into night. Suddenly, a sharp tap at the door startled her, rising carefully. She opened it to find Matthew Tilby, his face pale and eyes wide with urgency. "Miss Marple," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I heard footsteps behind Thelabree just now." She invited him inside and closed the door. "Quietly tell me everything," she said. Matthew swallowed hard. "I was coming home from my father's shop. It was late. I heard soft footsteps, like someone walking carefully, trying not to be heard. They stopped near the library wall, then moved on." Miss Marple's brow furrowed. "Did you see who it was?" "No, it was too dark, but it wasn't the wind. It was deliberate." She nodded, thoughtfully. "Someone is watching Matthew, watching and waiting." Later, she met Constable Drew near Thelabree, and together they patrolled the quiet streets. The moon hung low, casting silver shadows, and the night air was crisp with the scent of damp leaves. Near the library wall, they paused. Miss Marple pressed her hand against the cold stone. "This place holds secrets," she murmured, "and someone fears they might be uncovered." Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the bushes. Drew drew his flashlight, sweeping being through the dark. A figure bolted from the shadows, disappearing down a side alley. They gave chase, but the figure vanished into the maze of lanes before they could catch sight. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat alone, the night's events stirring a familiar uneasy. Past was no longer just memories. It was a presence, alive and restless. She folded her hands in her lap, eyes steady. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we find out who walks in the shadows." Chapter 14. The letter that changed everything. The morning sun broke over Rose Hill with a hesitant glow, casting long golden fingers across the village green. For me, it was just another day in a place that prided itself on tradition and tranquility. But for Miss Marple, the day promised something far less ordinary. As she stepped outside her cottage, the crisp air filled her lungs and a weight settled lightly on her shoulders, a mixture of anticipation and the quiet self born from years of understanding. Human nature's hidden depths waiting on her doorstep was an envelope unlike any she had seen before. It was heavier, thicker, and bore no handwriting. On its front, only a simple wax seal stamped with an unfamiliar crest. Curious, Miss Marple broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. The paper was rich and textured, the ink dark and delicate, written in a flowing hand that spoke of education and precision. "Dear Miss Marple, your involvement in the matters of Rose Hill has not gone unnoticed. Some truths are dangerous and some pasts better left undisturbed. Meet me at the pond at midnight if you wish to learn what has been hidden all these years. Come alone, ma'am." Her heart quickened. Thelator was a summons, a challenge, and a promise all at once. Miss Marple read wise, her mind racing through possibilities. Who was M? Could it be Mary, the young woman who had sought her aid, or someone else entirely? Perhaps the elusive figure's presence haunted the village like a shadow. That evening, Miss Marple prepared quietly, careful not to alarm her neighbors. She packed a small bag and a book, a lantern, and her trusty walking stick. As the village settled beneath the deepening twilight, she made her way toward the pond, the letter's words echoing softly in her mind. The path was familiar, yet transformed. Nth moonlight, every rustle of leaves and distant owl's call amplified into stillness. Arriving at the pond, she found the air thick with mist. Shapes moved softly among the reeds, and the water shimmered like glass. disturbed only by the occasional ripple. She waited, silent and patient, eye scanning the shadows. Minutes stretched into an hour. Just as doubt began to creep in, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall woman, cloaked and hooded face hidden Miss Marple. The figure whispered, voice low and steady. "Who are you?" Miss Marple asked calmly. The woman pulled back her hood, revealing sharp features and eyes bright with purpose. "I am the Keeper of Truths," she said, "and the guardian of Rose Hill's secrets." Miss Marple's gaze did not waver. "Then tell me, what have we been missing?" Woman smiled faintly. "More than you know, and less than you fear." With that, stepped closer, the mist curling around her like a veil. The night waisleth with possibility and Revelation chapter 15, the Keeper's warning. K. Woman's eyes gleamed faintly in the pale moonlight, sharp and unyielding like K. a hawk's miss. Marple studied her carefully, noting the deliberate calm in her posture, this slow certainty in her voice. "You speak as if you know everything, yet revealed so little," Miss Marple said quietly. "If you are truly the Keeper of Truths, then why cloak yourself in shadows?" The woman's lips curved into a thin smile. "Because some truths are dangerous, Miss Marple. Not everyone is ready to hear them, and some wounds, once opened, cannot be closed." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Yet silence has already wounded this village." Keeper's expression softened indeed. "But I came tonight not to judge, but to warn." "A warning?" Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Yes, the past is restless. It will not remain buried forever, and those who seek to keep it hidden may find themselves lost in the shadows they've created." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Are you saying someone in Rose Hill is endangered?" Woman hesitated, then spoke deliberately. "More than one, and not all will survive the reckoning." A chill swept across the pond, and Miss Marple felt the weight of those words settle deep within her. "Then we must prepare," she said firmly, "for the past will not wait, and neither shall I." The Keeper nodded, stepping back into the mist. "Remember, Miss Marple, the truth is a flame. It can warm, or it can burn." With that, she vanished, leaving Miss Marple alone beside the shimmering water. The night held its breath, and the village of Rose Hill awaited what was to come. Chapter 16. The Silent Testimony. The morning after her encounter at the pond, Miss Marple awoke to a sky heavy with clouds, and the steady rhythm of rain tapping against her window pane. The weather mirrored the weight pressing on her mind, thick, relentless, and impossible to ignore. As she sipped her morning tea, her thoughts drifted to the Keeper's warning, lives in danger, shadows closing in, and air cannon looming over Rose Hill. She knew that the village's fragile peace was fracturing, and that the time for quiet observation was swiftly ending. Her first visit that day was to the home of Arthur, allaying the retired Dr. Woe's knowledge of the village's past had become invaluable. She found him tending to his small garden, his hands steady despite the shield in the air. "Good morning, Arthur," she greeted him. "Jane," he replied with a weary smile. "You look troubled." "I am," Miss Marple admitted. "The Keeper warned me that more than one life is at risk. I fear the past's ghosts, air stirring." Dr. Melling nodded gravely. "It's true. There are those who would kill to keep their secrets safe." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Do you suspect anyone in particular?" The doctor hesitated, then spoke in a loud voice. "There is one name I have heard whispered. Martin Ashford. He left Rose Hill years ago under a cloud, but rumors say he has recently raided." Miss Marple's mind raced. Ashford was a name she had come across before, a man tied to the village's darker morsand, perhaps to the tragedies that had haunted it. Where might I find him? Shisked. His old family estate, just beyond the village boundary. Dr. Melling replied, "But be cautious. Jane Ashford is not a man to be taken lightly, determined to confront the past head." Miss Marple set out for the Ashford estate. As the rain eased, and clouds parted to reveal a sullen sun. The mansion stood isolated among towering oaks, its stone facade weathered by timid neglect. Ivy crawled up the walls like veins, and the windows stared out like hollow eyes. Miss Marple approached the heavy oak door and knocked firmly. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man with sharp features and piercing eyes. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but guarded. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I've come to ask about the past." "Mr. Ashford," she replied steadily, "and to seek the truth." He studied her silently before stepping aside. "Then come in there. Stories here that need telling." As the door closed behind her, the shadows inside seemed to grow deeper, and the reckoning drew closer. Chapter 17. Secrets behind closed doors. The Ashford estate's interior was a stark contrast to its crumbling exterior. Rich mahogany panels lined the walls. Heavy drapes muted the afternoon, lightened the air, smelled faintly of aged leather and forgotten promises. Miss Marple followed Martin Ashford down a dim corridor, each step echoing softly on the polished floor. "Please." Ashford gestured toward a study filled with bookshelves sagging under the weight of dusty volumes. "Sit." Miss Marple chose a chair near the window, the late sun casting long shadows across her knitting basket. Ashford took the opposite seat, folding his hands with the precision of a man used to control. "You wish to know about the past," he began. "Rose Hill is full of ghosts, some better left undisturbed." "I disagree," Miss Marple replied gently. "The past is what shapes us, but also what haunts us when ignored." Ashford studied her, his gaze piercing. "Margaret Ames was a fool stirring trouble where none belonged. Her accusations nearly ruined lives." Miss Marple's voice was calm, but firm. "What if the child who died?" Tommy Large Ashford's expressions heightened. "An accident, a tragedy no one wished for. But the truth, Jane, is rarely as simply as it seems." There was a pause. "I left Rose Hill years ago because the past, there is a heavy burden," he continued. "But I've returned to face it, whether the village wants me to or not." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And why do you fear most?" "Not what I did," Ashford said quietly, "but what others will do to keep their secrets safe." A faint sound interrupted him. A distant footstep, hesitant and slow, both turned toward the door. Mary stood in the threshold, eyes wide but resolute. "Came to hear the truth," she said softly. She regarded her with a mix of surprise and something deeper, perhaps regret. Miss Marple smiled gently. "The truth has a way of finding its way into the light." Together, the three of them sat ready. Tongue revealed the final threads of Rose Hill's long-held secrets. Chapter 18. The Unveiling. Small study in the Ashford estate felt charged with the weight of years as Martin Ashford, Miss Marple, and Mary gathered around a worn table strewn with letters, photographs, and faded documents. Afternoon light slanted through heavy curtains, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for the past itself. Ashford took a deep breath and began. "Tommy Larch's death was not an accident," he confessed, his voice low but steady. "It was a moment of fear, anger, and confusion that spiraled beyond control." Mary's eyes searched his face, waiting for more. "I was there," Ashford continued, "the night of the accident. Tensions ran high. The pond had been a place of child's joy, but also of secrets. Margaret Ames confronted me that night, accusing me of things I wished to bury." Miss Marple nodded quietly. "We argued," Ashford admitted. "Tommy was caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. I never meant for him to be hurt." Mary's breath caught, but someone pushed shading. Ashford closed his eyes briefly. "It wasn't. I pushed him." "Yes." In a moment of blind panic, silence fell heavy and raw. "I left Rose Hill because of it," Ashford said. because the village was ready to bury the truth along with Kemi. Miss Marple's gaze softened, and the letters, "They are my confession," Ashford said, "my way of making peace, of forcing the village and myself to remember." Mary looked away, tears glistening when "'cause silence became a poison," Ashford said, "and some wounds refused to heal without being phased." Miss Marple reached out, placing a comforting hand on his. "The past is never truly gone, but truth is the light that can finally free us." The three sat together, the veil lifted, ready to rebuild what had been broken for so long. Chapter 19. A village transformed in the days that followed the unveiling. Martin Ashford's confession. Rose Hill began to shift. The heavy cloak of secrecy that had long settled over the village was slowly lifted, replaced by tentative openness that brought both relief and unease. Miss Marple observed the change with quiet satisfaction. The meetings in the village hall became more frequent, villagers speaking candidly about long-buried fears and forgotten grievances. The pond, once a place of sorrow and solace, was slowly reclaiming its place as a site of remembrance and healing. Mary took an active role in encouraging the community to face the past. Together she organized gatherings by the pond, where stories were shared and tears shed, knitting the village closer with threads of shared truth. Yet, despite this progress, Miss Marple sensed the undercurrent of tension hadn't fully dissipated. Some residents remained, guarded their eyes, flickering with fear or resentment when certain names arose. One evening, as she walked through the quiet lanes toward her cottage, Miss Marple overheard a hushed conversation. "Ben, a hedge fed in. Think it's over," a man whispered, "but some things are better left buried." "Not if Miss Marple has anything to say about it," another voice replied firmly. Miss Marple smiled to herself. The battle for Rose Hill's soul was not yet dawning, and with awakening came the promise of true peace. So the moon rose over the village. Its silver light touched the rooftops, gently a reminder that even the darkest nights give way to dawn. Chapter 20. The light after the long night. The morning air in Rose Hill was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. For the first time in many months, the village felt unburdened. The weight of decades of silence had finally been lifted, allowing a collective exhale. Miss Marple stood by the pond, watching as children played along the grassy banks, their laughter ringing through the still air. Nearby villagers gathered around a fresh-lit placed plaque commemorating Tommy Larch and all those whose stories hadn't been hidden beneath the surface. Mary spoke to a small group, her voice steady and hopeful. The village, once fractured by fear and secrets, was weaving itself anew, stronger and more open. Miss Marple's eyes softened as she took in the scene, the flowers, the faces, the light filtering through the leaves. Her work here was done. She turned to leave. A familiar figure approached. Martin Ashford, now a man freed from the chains of his past. "Thank you, Jane," he said quietly, "for helping Rose Hill find its voice." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen." He nodded, "And you listened when no one else would." They parted with a quiet understanding that the past, no matter how dark, need not dictate the future. Walking back to her cottage, Miss Marple felt the peace of a night finally ended, the dawn of a village reborn, and somewhere in the distance, the church bells rang once more clear.